The twin suns of planet Orthea burned like fire in the sky. Every grain of sand shimmered under the heat, turning the training fields into a sea of gold. For the young cadets of the Galactic Academy, this was another day of survival training for Elira, the alien girl with pale blue skin and glowing silver eyes. It was another day of quiet suffering. The air was dry, and every breath felt like inhaling dust. Her lips were cracked, her throat ached, and her legs trembled under the weight of exhaustion. She walked behind the group of alien cadets, carrying a heavy metal pack across her shoulders. Her steps were slow, her mind dizzy from thirst. She whispered softly for water, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. The others heard her, but they only laughed. They were tall and strong, creatures with scales, horns, and pride sharper than blades. To them, Elira was weak, a useless recruit who slowed them down. One of them, a red-skinned cadet named Kor, turned and sneered, "If you can't handle a little heat, maybe you don't belong here." The others laughed again, their cruel voices echoing through the dry air. Elira lowered her head, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't cry. Tears would waste water, and on Orthea water meant life. She stumbled, her body giving way, and fell to her knees, the sand burning against her skin. The cadets kept walking, their laughter fading into the distance. No one cared that she was dying. From behind the group, a quiet figure stopped walking. It was Ethan Cross, a human cadet from Earth. He was tall, his skin tanned from the harsh sun, his eyes sharp and thoughtful. He had watched Elira suffer for days, and each time something in his chest tightened. Humans were rare in the Academy. Most alien species saw them as strange, fragile beings who didn't belong in intergalactic ranks. But Ethan didn't care what they thought. He cared that someone was suffering. He looked down at his own water ration, a small metallic bottle strapped to his belt. Every drop in it was counted, every sip monitored by the Academy's systems. Sharing it without permission was forbidden. But when he saw Elira's trembling hands reach for the sand as if trying to find moisture, something broke inside him. He took a deep breath, his decision made as Ethan walked toward her. He heard Kor's voice from ahead. "Leave her, human. She'll slow you down too." Ethan didn't answer. He knelt beside Elira, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. Her skin was hot like fire, and her breath came in small gasps. "Hey," he said softly. "You need to rest." She opened her eyes weakly, her voice dry and fragile. "Water, please?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing at the bottle, then at her. He knew the rules. He knew if the instructors found out, he'd be punished, maybe even expelled. But as he looked at her cracked lips and trembling body, the choice no longer felt like a rule. It felt like a test of his humanity. He uncapped the bottle and held it near her mouth. "Slowly," he said as she took a small sip. Her throat moved weakly, drinking just enough to ease the pain. Her eyes blinked open wider, her silver pupils glowing faintly under the suns. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you help me?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because you needed it," he said simply. He didn't add more because he didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. From a distance, some cadets noticed their mocking smiles fading slightly. They whispered to each other, surprised that the human would risk so much for someone so despised. But Ethan ignored them. He stayed beside Elira until she regained enough strength to stand. She looked at him again, her expression full of confusion and gratitude. "I don't understand humans," she said quietly. "You give even when you have nothing to spare." Ethan looked at the sky, his face calm under the heat. "Maybe that's what makes us human," he replied. The suns began to set, painting the horizon in blood-red light. The cadets gathered back at the camp, their bodies covered in dust and sweat. The instructor, a tall reptilian alien named Commander Vrax, shouted for silence. He looked over the group, his eyes pausing briefly on Elira, noticing the change, the faint life returning to her face. Then his gaze shifted to Ethan, and for a moment, it felt like the commander knew, but he said nothing, only nodded slowly before turning away. That night, as the cadets rested under the open desert sky, Ethan lay awake, staring at the stars. He thought about how small he was compared to the galaxy, just one human in a sea of powerful beings. Yet in that moment he felt something powerful, something pure. He had saved a life not for reward or glory, but because it was right and far away. Elira sat by the training tent, holding the same bottle he had shared, her eyes glistening as she whispered to herself, "Humans, they are strange, but maybe they are special." The wind blew across the sands of Orthea, carrying the faint sound of her words into the night, and for the first time since she arrived on that cruel planet, Aelira felt a tiny spark of hope, a spark that would one day grow into a story that changed the galaxy. The next morning came with a sky full of heat and light. The twin suns of Orthea rose like burning eyes over the desert, melting the dunes into a golden river of dust. The cadets gathered near the training grounds, their shadows long and sharp. Aelira stood quietly at the edge of the group, still weak but alive, her body trembling from the memory of yesterday's pain. The other aliens glanced at her with silent judgment, some with disgust, some with cold amusement. Only one pair of eyes showed warmth. Ethan's, watching from a short distance. Commander Vrax's voice boomed through the air. "Today's mission: cross the ridge of ash without assistance, return with your gear intact, and no one gets extra water until the end." The crowd groaned softly, some muttering under their breath. Ethan looked at the horizon, knowing how far and cruel that ridge was. Aelira lowered her gaze, clutching her pack tightly, her lips already dry from the morning wind. She remembered the water Ethan gave her, the way it felt like life returning to her bones. But she also remembered the stares that followed, the whispers that grew louder after the sunset. When the training began, the cadets spread across the open sands. The heat wrapped around them like a living creature. Pressing into their lungs, Aelira walked slowly, her steps steady but heavy. Behind her, Kor and his group followed, their cruel laughter echoing in the distance. Kor's voice carried through the wind. "Careful, Aelira. Wouldn't want you begging for water again." The others laughed, splashing droplets from their own bottles, letting them fall into the sand just to see her flinch. Her face turned away, but Ethan saw everything. He tightened his grip on his pack, his fists clenched. Part of him wanted to shout, to fight. But he remembered the rules. Humans were always watched, always judged twice as hard if he caused trouble. They would call him reckless, emotional, undisciplined. So he stayed quiet for now. Hours passed, and the ridge grew steeper, the wind harsher. Some cadets began to tire, but Aelira kept going, her breath uneven yet determined. Ethan stayed close, pretending to scan the area, but always keeping her within sight. Then near the halfway point, Kor stepped forward. Blocking her path, he smirked, his red scales glinting under the suns. "Still think humans can save you, Dust Girl?" Aelira tried to step around him, but he shoved her back, her pack falling into the sand. "Stop it," Ethan said sharply, his voice cutting through the air. The group turned to him, a human daring to interrupt. Kor laughed coldly. "And what will you do, Earthling? Share your precious water again? Maybe she'll follow you like a pet this time." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes steady. "I'll do what's right," he said simply, "even if you don't understand it." For a moment, silence filled the ridge, only the wind whistling between the rocks. Then Kor snorted, pushing past him. "You'll regret it, human. Kindness makes you weak out here." Ethan watched them walk away, his heart burning but his resolve stronger than ever. When they reached the far side of the ridge, the suns were low, painting the desert in orange fire. Aelira's legs finally gave out and she fell to her knees once more. Gasping for breath, Ethan ran to her side. Helping her sit up, she shook her head weakly, whispering, "Don't, they'll see you." But he didn't move away. "They already have," he said quietly, handing her a small energy tablet from his pocket. "It's not water, but it'll help." She took it with trembling hands, her eyes shining faintly. "Why do you keep helping me?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because someone has to," he said. "Because kindness isn't weakness, it's strength, far above." The Academy's drones recorded everything, every step, every word, every act of defiance. Later that night, when the cadets returned to camp, whispers spread faster than the wind. "The human broke the rule again," someone said. "He's protecting that alien girl?" Others laughed. Some frowned, some stayed silent, but among them, a few began to wonder. Why would a human risk punishment for an alien no one cared about? Commander Vrax stood in the shadows near the tent, his reptilian eyes cold and calculating. He had seen the footage, every second of it. When Ethan passed him that evening, the commander spoke in a low voice. "You are aware that sharing rations is forbidden?" Ethan stopped, his heart pounding. "Yes, sir." "And yet you did it anyway," Vrax continued. His tone unreadable, Ethan looked up at him. His voice calm. She was dying. Sir? The commander studied him for a long moment before saying, Humans and their emotions. One day they will either save the galaxy or destroy it. Then he turned away, leaving Ethan standing in the quiet desert night. Later, under the starlight, Elira approached him near the edge of the camp. Her voice was soft, trembling like the wind. They will punish you for helping me. Ethan looked at her, the faint glow of the moons reflecting in his eyes. Then let them, he said. I'd rather be punished for compassion than praised for cruelty. Elira said nothing, but a tear rolled down her cheek, not of pain, but of something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As the night deepened, the two sat in silence, the endless desert stretching around them like an ocean of stars, and somewhere beyond that sky fate began to move, because a single act of kindness on a dying planet was about to start a chain of events that no one, not even the stars, could stop. Night fell over planet Orthea like a blanket of dark fire. The desert shimmered under the twin moons, the air still hot even after sunset. The camp was silent, except for the distant hum of power generators and the low whisper of wind moving through the dunes. Ethan sat outside his tent, his hands resting on the cold sand. Staring at the stars above, he could not sleep, his mind replaying every cruel laugh, every drop of wasted water, and Elira's faint voice begging for help. Her words haunted him like echoes in the night. He looked down at his ration pack, one small bottle of water and 2 energy bars left for the next 2 days. The rule was clear. Ration sharing was forbidden. Survival was personal. Yet deep inside, Ethan knew he could not just watch her die again. The desert might test strength, but he believed it also tested hearts across the camp. Elira lay curled in the sand near the edge of the tents, her body trembling under the cold wind. Her skin, once a faint blue glow, now looked pale and cracked, her energy fading fast. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a whisper of life fighting against the impossible. She thought of home, of oceans that once existed on her planet before it turned to dust. She had joined the academy to prove her kind could still survive, still belong among the stars, but now she felt forgotten, alone, and broken. Ethan watched her from a distance, his chest tightening with helpless anger. He knew the punishment. Breaking the rule again could mean dismissal or worse, exile from the program. But then he remembered her eyes when he gave her water, the disbelief, the fragile hope. No rule could be stronger than that moment. He stood up quietly, picked up his water bottle, and walked through the shadows toward her. The camp lights flickered softly as he moved. No one noticed. Most cadets were asleep, exhausted from the long march. He knelt beside Elira, her breathing faint, her lips dry and cracked. When she opened her eyes and saw him, she tried to speak, but no sound came out. Shh, he whispered. Don't talk. He lifted her gently, supporting her head, and opened the bottle. The moonlight reflected off the silver liquid as he tilted it slowly to her lips. She took a weak sip, then another, and the smallest color returned to her skin. Her silver eyes blinked open wider, a flicker of life lighting within them. You shouldn't, she whispered, her voice trembling. You'll be punished, Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe, he said, but at least I'll know I did something right. For a moment, they sat there in silence, 2 lives from 2 worlds bound by one simple act of kindness. Then a sound broke the quiet, the click of a recorder drone activating above them. Ethan froze, looking up, his heart racing. A small red light blinked in the darkness, hovering near one of the tents. He knew it was recording everything, every word, every movement. Elira saw it too, panic flashing in her eyes. Go, she whispered, before they see. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, I won't leave you again, he said, his tone calm but firm. The next morning, the alarm horn echoed through the camp. Cadets rushed out of their tents, the commander's voice booming across the desert. All units, form up. Ethan stepped out, his water bottle empty, his face steady though his heart pounded in his chest. Commander Vrax stood in front of the line, holding a small drone recorder in his clawed hand. His reptilian eyes scanned the crowd before stopping on Ethan. Last night, the commander said slowly, someone disobeyed direct orders and shared restricted resources. No one spoke, but everyone knew. Kor smirked, glancing toward Ethan, whispering to his friends. The human's done for. Vrax raised the drone, the small screen showing Ethan kneeling beside Elira. The camp murmured, whispers turning to quiet gasps. Ethan didn't move, his eyes fixed on the commander. Vrax walked closer, his voice low but sharp. "Do you deny this?" Ethan shook his head. "No, sir." The commander's tail flicked in the dust. "You know the punishment." "Yes," Ethan said. "But I also know what happens if we forget what mercy means." The commander stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching like the desert itself. Then he said quietly, "You risked your place in this academy for her. Why?" Ethan's answer was simple. "Because she's alive. And that should matter." For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. Even Kor looked uncertain, his smirk fading. Commander Vrax finally turned away, his tone softer now. "Report to my tent at dusk." "Human?" Ethan nodded, standing straight, his heart heavy but unbroken. When the formation ended, Alira walked toward him slowly, her eyes filled with worry. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll take everything from you." Ethan smiled weakly. "Maybe they'll take my rank. But they can't take my choice." Her eyes shimmered like starlight. "Humans, you are strange," she said softly. "But maybe you are what the galaxy needs." That night, as the camp lights dimmed, Ethan stood outside the commander's tent. The stars above seemed closer than ever, watching silently. Inside, he could hear Vrax's deep voice speaking to someone through a communicator. Words like report, discipline, and evaluation echoed faintly. But when Ethan stepped in, Vrax's gaze was calm, thoughtful. He studied the young human for a long moment before saying, "Do you know what your kind is called among the other races, Cross?" Ethan shook his head. "They call you the species that cares too much," Vrax said, "and perhaps that is not a weakness after all." Ethan didn't answer. But deep inside, something sparked, a feeling stronger than fear, stronger than pride, hope. For the first time, he realized that being human in a galaxy full of power didn't mean being the strongest. It meant being the one who refused to stop caring. And out in the quiet desert, Alira looked toward the stars, whispering to herself, "The human gave me water, but what he really gave me was faith." The morning sun rose slowly over the desert of Orthia, painting the sand in shades of fire and gold. The air was dry, sharp, and heavy with silence. Inside the Galactic Academy camp, tension filled every corner. Every cadet knew what was coming. Punishment, judgment, or maybe something far worse. Ethan stood in front of the command tent, his uniform covered in dust, his eyes tired but calm. Around him, the other cadets whispered, their voices soft and nervous. They had seen the footage. They had watched the human break the rules. Some pitied him, some admired him, but none dared to speak for him. Even Alira stayed back, her heart pounding in fear, her throat too tight to call out his name. Commander Vrax stepped out of the tent, his scales shining like black glass under the light. His tail moved slowly behind him, cutting lines into the sand. He looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking, his deep voice echoing across the camp. "Cadet Ethan Cross, you stand accused of breaking the resource preservation law," he said. "Do you deny that you gave your ration to another cadet?" Ethan stood straight, his voice steady. "No, sir, I do not deny it." Gasps rose from the crowd. Kor smirked in the back, whispering something to his friends. "Told you, humans are too soft to survive." Commander Vrax raised a clawed hand, and silence returned. "You understand that by doing so, you endangered not only yourself but the mission and the order of this academy," he said. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand." "Then why did you do it?" the commander asked. His eyes narrowing slightly, Ethan took a breath, feeling the dry air sting his throat. "Because she was dying," he said simply, "and rules mean nothing if we forget how to be alive." The camp was silent. Every cadet stood frozen, their eyes on the young human who spoke like he carried the weight of a world inside him. Commander Vrax said nothing for a long time. Then he turned to the side and gestured toward the open desert. "Cadet Cross," he said coldly, "since you believe so strongly in compassion, you will now prove your endurance." Ethan's stomach tightened. "You will march across the dune of glass alone, no rations, no assistance, and you will return before sunset." Murmurs broke out instantly. "That's impossible," someone whispered. "No one survives that heat without water." But Vrax's tone left no space for argument. "Let us see," he said. "If human kindness can survive the desert." Alira's heart shattered. She wanted to run to him, to stop it, to beg the commander for mercy. But before she could move, Ethan turned and met her eyes. He gave a small smile, calm, brave, full of meaning. It was the kind of smile that said, "Don't worry," even when everything was falling apart. Ethan took one step, then another, walking toward the horizon. The desert wind howled around him, lifting waves of dust. Every cadet watched in silence as his figure grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared into the golden haze. The suns climbed higher and the heat turned merciless. Hours passed. Some cadets turned away, unable to watch, but Illyra didn't move, her eyes never leaving the line where sky met sand. Inside the command tent, Frax watched the readings on his screen. Body temperature, heart rate, location. Every cadet carried a survival tracker implanted under the skin. Ethan's vitals were dropping fast. Frax's jaw tightened, his tail flicking with unease. He had expected the human to beg, to turn back, to surrender, but the tracker showed Ethan still moving forward. One step at a time through the hottest part of the desert. By midday, the sky burned white, and the ground shimmered like molten glass. Ethan's vision blurred, his lips cracked. His throat screamed for water, his steps slowed, but he kept walking in his mind. He saw Illyra, her faint smile, her whisper of gratitude. It was enough to push him forward. The pain didn't matter. The rules didn't matter. What mattered was proving that compassion wasn't weakness. Back at camp, Illyra's patience broke. She rushed toward Commander Vrax, her voice shaking. "Please stop this," she said. "He will die out there." Vrax turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "He broke the rule," he said. "He must face the consequence." Tears filled her eyes. "Then punish me too," she said, "because it was my life he saved." For a moment, something changed in the commander's gaze. A flicker of thought, of doubt. He looked back at the screen, watching the human's vitals dip dangerously low. "Stubborn creature," he muttered under his breath, though no one knew whether he meant Ethan or himself. As the sun began to sink, a faint signal appeared near the camp border. Illyra ran outside, the sand biting her feet. There, on the horizon, a small figure stumbled through the light. Ethan, barely standing, his uniform torn, his lips white from thirst. He took one last step and collapsed near the camp gate. Illyra reached him first. Falling to her knees beside him, she lifted his head, her tears falling on his dry skin. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" His eyes opened weakly, his voice rough but calm. "Because someone had to show them what being human means." The camp was silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Commander Vrax stepped forward slowly, his eyes fixed on the young human lying on the sand. For the first time in many years, something like respect flickered across his cold face. "Get him water," he ordered quietly. Now that night the camp stayed awake. Some cadets whispered his name. Others stared at the stars, and far above the desert, the wind carried one truth across the endless sky. That one human had done what no rule could ever teach. He had reminded them all what it meant to care. The desert was quiet the next morning. The suns rose slowly above the dunes, their light touching the camp like golden fire. Everyone in the academy felt the change. Something invisible, powerful and new. The night before had left them all speechless. They had seen Ethan Cross, the human who walked through fire for kindness, return alive from a march meant to break him. And though his body was weak, his spirit shone brighter than any sun. Inside the medical tent, Ethan lay on a narrow bed, his lips no longer dry, his breathing soft and even. Illyra sat beside him, her hands folded tightly, her eyes never leaving his face. She had barely slept, afraid that if she closed her eyes he might disappear. When Ethan stirred and slowly opened his eyes, she smiled through tears. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice full of relief. Ethan gave a tired smile. "Feels like I walked across an entire planet." Illyra laughed softly, the sound trembling like music. "You nearly did," she said. "And for what?" "For me." Ethan looked at her, his voice gentle but firm. "Not just for you," he said. "For what's right." Outside, the camp was restless. Cadets whispered among themselves. Even Kor, once proud and cruel, sat alone staring at the sand. Something in him had shifted. Guilt, shame, or maybe respect. He remembered how easily he had laughed when Illyra begged for water. Now the thought of it made his stomach twist. For the first time he wondered what it meant to be strong. Commander Vrax stood near the command tent, his eyes watching the horizon. He had seen many warriors in his time, ruthless soldiers, brave captains, fearless leaders. But the human boy had shown something different, something that no rule book could teach. Vrax's claws tightened around his staff, his mind heavy with thought. When he entered the medical tent, the silence grew heavy. Illyra stood quickly, nervous, her heart racing. Ethan tried to sit up, but Vrax raised a hand. "Stay down, cadet," he said. His tone calm. For a long moment, the commander said nothing, only studied the young human's face. Then he spoke quietly. "You broke the rule, but you also broke something else. The fear that kept others from seeing what truly matters." Ethan blinked. Unsure what to say, Vrax continued. "In my world, we are taught that mercy is weakness, that compassion wastes strength." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But today, I am not so sure." Illyra's heart lifted, her eyes widening in disbelief. The commander turned to her and said, "You owe this human your life, but perhaps we all owe him more than that." He looked at Ethan again. "You will not be punished, Cadet Cross," he said. "In fact, your act will be recorded in the Academy's Hall of Honor." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, I didn't do it for honor." Vrax nodded. "And that is exactly why you deserve it." The announcement spread through the camp like wildfire. Whispers turned into conversations, and conversations turned into quiet reflection. For the first time, cadets from dozens of alien species began to see humans differently, not as fragile creatures of flesh and water, but as beings with hearts that refused to give up. Even Kor approached Illyra that evening, his voice low and uneasy. "I was wrong," he said. Illyra looked at him, her expression calm. "You were cruel," she said softly, "but maybe now you understand." He nodded slowly. "He showed us something I didn't believe existed, strength without hate." Days passed, and Ethan slowly recovered. He trained again side by side with Illyra. Their friendship growing stronger, she no longer walked behind the group. She walked beside him, and the others began to follow their lead, sharing water, helping each other. No longer mocking the weak, the Academy, once built on discipline and fear, now found a new rule written in unspoken hearts: that courage without compassion is hollow, and strength without kindness is meaningless. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Ethan and Illyra climbed the same ridge where it had all begun. The wind was gentle, the sand cool under their boots. Illyra looked at the endless desert below and said quietly, "When I first came here, I thought this planet was made of death." Ethan smiled, looking at the glowing sky. "Maybe it still is," he said. "But even in a dead world, something can still grow." She turned to him, her silver eyes soft. "You mean hope?" He nodded. "Always hope." Far above them, the Academy's banners fluttered in the wind, and though no one said it aloud, every cadet, every commander, every observer who heard their story knew one truth: that humanity's greatest weapon was never technology or power. It was empathy, the unbreakable will to care when no one else dared to. Later that night, Ethan sat outside his tent, staring at the stars once more. He thought of Earth, of oceans and forests, of faces he might never see again. But he also thought of Illyra's smile, the way her eyes now held light instead of fear. He whispered softly to himself, "Maybe that's what it means to be human." And in the soft whispering winds of Orthea, it almost felt like the stars agreed. Illyra stepped out quietly and sat beside him. For a long moment they said nothing, just watched the galaxy turn above them. Finally she spoke. "You gave me water once," she said, "but what you really gave me was a reason to believe again." Ethan smiled, the moonlight touching his face. "Then that was worth every drop." The camera of fate pulled back, showing two small figures on a vast world of dust and fire, a human and an alien sitting side by side under the endless stars. And as the wind carried their quiet laughter into the night, a single truth echoed across the universe: that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change entire worlds.